Hello and welcome to May's Crochet. I am Rachel and we are at the end, the very tail end of the biggest project I have ever worked on in my entire life. I decided to start reading more last year. Before that, I think in 2023 I had maybe 10 books that I read, which isn't bad. Like it's better than many people who don't read at all. But I've really gotten into audiobooks because I do have trouble sitting and concentrating while reading. I've been over this, and I'm not going to argue whether audiobooks are reading or not. You can save that for your priest. I don't care. So I saw some people who decided to crochet a granny square in the same colors as every book cover that they read last year. I'm like, well, that sounds like fun. Maybe it'll motivate me to do more, and then I can have a nice blanket at the end. What I did not anticipate was it turning into the gigantic amount of work that I put into it. Again, more than anything else I've ever done. So I originally was going to do 80 books, and then I'm like, no, we can get 100 in there. And I did. I got 100. But that was a lot of granny squares because I didn't want a 10 by 10 blanket. So I decided on a 10 by 12 blanket. So the top two rows, the top row says books read and the bottom row says in 2020. And then the middle 10 by 10 part are the squares for the books. However, I did not just go with the colors of the cover. I tried to make the cover as best I could out of granny squares. And sometimes I actually kind of nailed it, and sometimes it's like, is that really what we're going for? So there were a lot of color changes because of that, and then I decided, well, there's a lot of stuff that could get messed with if I just left the back, plus it was going to be hideous on the back too. So then I also made an extra set of 120 squares to cover the back of the squares. So in total I have 240 granny squares of 5 rounds each. It is very heavy. I have no idea where I'm going to put it. So first, before the big reveal, I will go ahead and share footage of me making the last 15 squares to represent the last 15 books of the year with my opinions and a voiceover. And then there'll be a slideshow of all 100 with the book cover and the granny square. And then I'll show the whole blanket in its entirety. I just finished the border last night. This has been an absolute labor of love. That's why I haven't been around in a couple weeks. I've been trying to get this thing finished. I just need it done at this point. So, and then I'll talk a little bit about favorites or what I didn't like, what I did like, things I wish I had done differently at the end. So for now, enjoy these next 15 squares that I made. Book 86 is Educated by Tara Westover. In the foothills of the southern Idaho mountains, the Westover family lives completely off the grid under the tyrannical rule of their conservative Mormon father. No government, no hospitals, no school. And despite everything against her, younger daughter Tara does her best to learn under such strict rules, even after her mother has given up homeschooling the kids early on, presumably because of an undiagnosed learning disability one of her brothers has. Eventually, Tara applies to BYU, where she struggles but is blessed by professors that truly believe in her, and she eventually makes it all the way to Cambridge to earn her doctorate. I didn't realize that this was a memoir when I borrowed it. I just really like the cover, despite that it does say a memoir, so I mean, it's my own fault for not reading it. But I definitely should have approached it like a work of fiction because that's what it ends up feeling like in the end. It's easy to get swept in Tara's tales of abuse, both mental and physical, at the hands of many of her family members. So we can be amazed and proud when she comes out on the other side, having earned multiple degrees from such prestigious institutions. Yes, at times it feels like some things don't add up, and the characters she's painted as villains for most of the book have the most tender moments, acting the complete opposite from what we expect. And her luck never seems to run out in higher education, with chance after second chance just lined up for a poor uneducated mountain girl. You know, she starts failing classes and somehow manages to skate through after a heart-to-heart with a professor or all. But anyway, by the end of the story, I was really curious about her parents, from whom she claims to be estranged by the end of the book. I wondered if they were still alive, since the book was published pre-COVID, and her description of the family's severe accidents, injuries, and denial of modern medicine could lead one to believe they were not long for this world. However, after one Google search, I knew the story wasn't exactly truthful. At one point, when Tara was in college, her father was involved in an explosion during one of his odd jobs. He was treated with her mother's herbal remedies at home, and though touch and go at times, miraculously survived. For the remainder of the book, she mentions her father's burn survivor appearance, shocking anyone he encounters for the first time, because according to Tara, his face practically melted off. But with the aforementioned Google search, one is faced with a modern-day picture of her father, looking literally nothing like what's described in the book. And considering his refusal to ever see a doctor, we can assume he hasn't undergone plastic surgery, though even with modern medicine, there would be traces of what he'd endured. And yet, there isn't the slightest indication that his face ever melted off. And from there, one can start to easily go down a rabbit hole of interviews and articles claiming Tara's version of events are not entirely accurate. Okay, so obviously human memory is imperfect. It's fallible. We all know this. However, you don't get mixed up on whether somebody's face melted off or not. You don't. And if Tara felt so comfortable as to embellish such an easily disputable detail of her story, who knows what else she could have lied about, especially things not so easily disputable. We want to believe victims, and we should, but we should also keep in mind that book sales are on the line. So book 87 is The Mist by Stephen King. So after a terrible summer storm, an eerie mist descends over a small New England vacation town. A group of about 80 people take refuge in the local grocery store as unearthly creatures appear in the mist and start killing anyone who sets foot out into it. But the creatures outside aren't the only threat, as a religious zealot in the store starts gathering followers to her belief that the only way to eradicate the deadly threat outside is through human sacrifice, leaving one father to make the impossible choice of which horror is one his small group will more likely survive. So I love the film adaptation of this novella. It just absolutely blew me away, almost 20 years ago now that it's been out. I just never gotten around to reading the book. As it turns out, the film is extremely close to the novella, except for two main points, and these two changes make all the difference. The first made me straight up hate the protagonist, David, the father concerned with his 5-year-old son's safety and the eventual leader of the small group of survivors who have not been brainwashed. After being trapped in the grocery store for literally half a day, he finds himself wildly attracted to an out-of-towner named Amanda, who's trying to keep a level head like him. The two end up having sex in the manager's office in the middle of the night while his son is sound asleep. David doesn't even know if his wife is dead or alive back at their house. Why, Stephen King? I know he's done worse, but why? So I was really glad that this was left out of the film because I don't feel it serves any purpose at all. It just made me hate David so much, and I would not have cared at all about the film, or at least the second half of the film, if they had left this in. And the other change was the ending, which I already knew had been changed. And I'm not going to spoil it, but the book's ending is very open-ended and very unsure of what's going to happen next, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But the film's ending, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. It is an absolute gut punch, the likes of which I have not seen since in a very, very long time. So this is definitely one of those instances where the movie is better than the book. Book 88 is The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. Danny Conroy recounts the story of his life from a young boy with a strict, unloving father, whose second marriage put a strain on the family, especially after his father's death, when Danny's wicked stepmother kicks him out of the house at the age of 15. Through it all is Danny's close relationship with his older sister Maeve and their love-hate obsession with their childhood home, titled The Dutch House, because they were from money and rich people named their houses, apparently. I don't know. Anyway, and to be clear, Danny's mother left when he was very young, so he was more or less an orphan at that point. Unhoused orphan. Anyway, this was an intriguing family drama, and the relationship between Maeve and Danny was really fascinating, especially considering their 8-year age gap. But given the fact that the mother did leave when he was a baby, the sister probably felt very maternal toward him, which is sad, but that's how it is sometimes. But honestly, not a lot happens in this story, and sometimes that's just life. Most of the time that's just life, because most people just live ordinary lives, and everyone still has a story to tell if they choose to. And that really does seem to be Anne Patchett's way, at least in the 2 books that I've consumed so far, because she takes what could be considered mundane, but makes it worth hearing. So I did really enjoy the book. Again, not a lot happened, but that was okay. It was just told in a very intriguing way, just kept me wondering what's going to happen to these 2 siblings. Nothing spectacular, just life, but that was fine. I guess I'm at that point where I don't need spectacular, just a good story, and this was a good story. Book 89 is The Body by Stephen King. It is about 4 boys at the end of summer, right before they start middle school in a small town in New England, because it's Stephen King and that's what he writes, in the early 60s. So they go searching for a local missing boy who's their age, who's been presumed dead, and they all have their own baggage that they're dealing with at the same time. So I grew up with this movie, an edited for television version, but you can bet I wore that VHS tape out. And it was nice to know that there weren't a lot of big changes from the book. There are a few character action switches, like Gordy pulled Teddy off the train tracks when he tried to dodge it, and Chris fired the gun at the end when they're all fighting with the older boys. There's a short story that Gordy wrote, other than the pie-eating one, that's just kind of thrown in the middle, and it was something he published in college. And I'm not really sure why King felt the need to add that. Gordy and his friends do get their asses kicked by Ace and the rest of the older boys in the book. They promised to do it in the movie, or they swore they'd do it in the movie. They actually do it in the book, which makes sense. It really does, because these are rough guys, and I can't imagine them just letting that go. Now, for movie purposes, it could have been runtime. It could have been too dark of a note to have the story go there. I don't know. As well as what adult Gordy tells us Fern and Teddy's futures held much darker in the book than in the movie. I was actually like, wait, that's not how that went, right? And I went back and I watched the end of the movie to kind of verify that that is not what happened in the movie version. So maybe after everything that they had been through, the movie just wanted to end it on a lighter note. I'm not really sure. But anyway, it was nice to know that a movie I've loved pretty much all of my life. I can't remember not having seen this movie. It was just nice that they stuck to the source material so that when I did get around to reading the source material, I didn't do a complete 180 on the main characters, unlike The Mist. Yep, so the book and movie are pretty equal, I think, but I mean, I still enjoy the movie more just because it's been my main source of the story for decades at this point. Book 90 is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. In it, a young governess in a new job begins to encounter the spirits of 2 former employees of the estate, a valet and the previous governess, whom she believes are trying to influence her new young charges, Flora and Miles. So I hated this book. I thought it was terrible. I know it's hailed as one of the classic gothic horror stories, but I just didn't get it. I was confused most of the time. Firstly, there was like a lot of setup to this story being told by a third party to a group of obnoxious friends at Christmas Eve. Like, apparently it was a thing where they would sit around and tell ghost stories on Christmas Eve with a group of friends. And this guy's like, oh, well, I've got one for you about this woman I used to know. So then it became an epistolary story where he read out her encounters from a letter that she had written him years before. And for some reason, the story ends, skipping ahead, very abruptly, and we never get back to that original friend, the narrator, and his group of friends and like their reactions or anything. So I don't know why James felt the need to set up the story with all of that if we didn't even go back to those characters. It literally just ends with the young governess and no callback to what was going on. So a big problem I had was the main character of the governess. She seemed hysterical throughout the entire story, even in a completely mundane situation or conversation. Literally nothing was going on, and she acted like she was having a panic attack over nothing. She was too obsessed with the children and their beauty. The way she talked about the little girl was creepy, and she was convinced they could do no wrong because of how pretty they were. Like, okay, that's a choice. And then my biggest problem was her use of pronouns. She would say she or he, and it could mean on either side one of any 3 to 4 characters. And I didn't know who she was talking about half the time. So I couldn't tell if he referred to the ghost of the valet or the little boy or the little boy's uncle, who was her boss. When she said she, I didn't know if she meant she is in the little girl, she is in the housekeeper, or she is in the spirit of the former governess. Like, she just didn't label anybody properly for me to know who the hell she was talking about when she was having a complete freak out meltdown. So I saw her standing by the lake. Okay, well, who? The little girl? Was she gonna fall in? The spirit? Was she haunting you? The housekeeper? Was she supposed to be inside housekeeping? I don't know. And of course, it's an older book from 1898, so the language was very difficult to understand at times, especially when you didn't know who the hell was being spoken about. And again, the ending was just too abrupt. Like, I felt like we went through all of that, and it was just like, oh, boom, end. I was just bored and confused and overall disappointed with the reputation this book has for being like a classic horror story. It was just not scary. Book 91 is Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, which is the memoir by Matthew Perry. The Friends actor tells his life story from his parents' whirlwind romance and split up through his rise to fame as America's favorite sarcastic goof, and for all of it, his severe addiction to drugs and alcohol and their extreme toll on his life. So it was very haunting listening to Perry's story with his own narration, especially when he mentions this may be reaching his audience beyond the grave. And it definitely was, since he died less than a year after its publication. It's difficult to hear about the struggles of someone who made you laugh on a weekly basis for a decade. Memoirs are definitely not my thing, but this one was better than others because I didn't feel emotionally manipulated by the end, unlike I did with Educated earlier. So Perry did bounce around a lot in his own story, where he would just stop everything at a time when he would have been in his mid-30s and go back to a story from when he was like 10. And sometimes it kind of related, but it also felt a little chaotic. So it was hard to kind of keep some events straight, but otherwise I am very glad I finally got to this story because I just really loved Friends. I really did. It is one of my absolute favorite shows of all time, and it's a comfort show at this point. I hate knowing how much he suffered. And this wasn't some shocking tell-all. It was just a very raw story of what he had gone through and how sorry he was and how he works at trying to be better every day. So unfortunately, we now know that his demons did catch up with him in the end, but he did try, and that meant something. 92, Murder on the Orient Express by the Agatha Christie. On a long train ride to London, a murder occurs, and renowned detective Hercule Poirot investigates the other passengers and discovers the victim was a much-hated man with many enemies. So this is my first Agatha Christie, and I really enjoyed it. When I listened to Everyone in My Family is a Murderer, the narrator talks about modern-day murder mysteries and how it's more about having that shocking ending for the audience more than an actual plot or good story. And he does reference Agatha Christie, among others, as having the original good murder mystery stories. And so I was like, hey, I've never actually done an Agatha Christie, so let's remedy that. I did get exasperated with Poirot's investigation at one point. It felt like it was being dragged on, and it was like he was going through all these connections to the murder victim, and I'm like, there's no way all this is going to make sense. But it did. It was shocking, but without the plot hole. It wasn't about the shock. It was just like, oh, damn. Okay. So in the end, I just needed to be more patient. But then again, I've gone through a lot of modern day murder mysteries, so that's where my brain was. And I wasn't sitting here anticipating something more of a slow burn. By today's standards, it might be mislabeled as tame, but it definitely had a quality difficult to find in modern murder mysteries. So maybe I'll check out some of her other books. Book 93, we have yet another Stephen King novella. It is Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption, though in a lot of places I did just find it as Shawshank Redemption. Like, that was not the original title, so I don't know what Mandela effect is going on, but I know it used to be Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. Obviously, one of the most famous movies of all time, but in case you don't know, Andy Dufresne is convicted of murdering his cheating wife and her lover and is sent to Shawshank Prison, where he makes a friend in Red, a guy who can get things, and spends his years trying to better the prison from inside with the hope of leaving someday. So the bones of the story of what became one of the most beloved films of all time are there, but having seen the movie so many times, the novella does fall flat in some places, especially toward the end. Straight up, I'm gonna spoil it. It's Shawshank Redemption, come on. So I like the group of friends in the movie where the book makes it seem that Red and Andy are the only prisoners most of the time. And Andy telling Red his whole plan before the escape he makes at the end didn't work for me. I liked that element of mystery that Red and the audience have to go through in the movie when Andy seems very depressed and like maybe he's suicidal. I enjoyed that aspect of Red being very concerned for him, and then the escape, and then all the clues Andy leaves behind for Red to come find him in Mexico someday. It added some suspense that the book just really didn't offer once Andy divulged his entire plan to Red before he even breaks out of prison. And then as far as the ending with the warden not getting his just desserts in the book, it felt wrong. He was such an evil man that the movie nailed it for me. Like, I'm glad he got what he got in the end. It felt right. So not getting that in the book felt incomplete. Disappointing, actually. This is another case where I find that Stephen King had some good elements for the story, but somebody came along and made a movie and made it so much better out of his work. And that's all the Stephen King for the rest of this video, I promise. Book 94 is The Inmate by Frida McFadden. The book centers on Brooke, who takes a job as a nurse practitioner at the same prison her ex-boyfriend is serving time for murder. The story goes from present-day Brooke's day-to-day problems, including her job and being a single mother, to the past, on the fateful night when several of her friends ended up dead and her boyfriend was to blame. Trying to build a new life becomes increasingly difficult as Brooke tries to piece together what happened 11 years prior. So with this being my second Frida McFadden book this year and ever, I gotta be honest, I'm not sure how she is able to type her manuscripts because her hands must be cramping from grasping at straws all the time to complete the plots of her story. From the premise to the reveal, every element felt like McFadden spun a wheel with random plot devices to decide her next step. It was so dumb. I thought the ending of The Housemaid was a stretch, but this was stretched beyond a breaking point. Absolutely nothing made sense, like how a prison system would not do a background check on a nurse practitioner coming to work there with prisoners. And that's how Brooke ended up at the same prison as her ex-boyfriend / the father of her son, spoiler alert. So it was just like, right off the bat, it's like, oh, they're so busy and so desperate that they just skipped the background check. My ass, it's a prison, there's no way. And we were just expected to believe that immediately. So just imagine how the rest of the book goes, because that's how unbelievable most of it is. And with that, I can definitely say I won't be reading another Frida McFadden book because it's just too ridiculous. I think a lot of people read them because they're very easy to consume, but it ain't worth it. It's really not for me. So I'm done. And number 95 is The Deep by Rivers Solomon. So this is a fantasy that reimagines an underwater race of people born from the pregnant enslaved women who were thrown overboard during the crossing of the Atlantic. The babies were born, but the mothers died, and the babies became merfolk. So with the past traumas being too much to remember, a historian is chosen to hold the memories, both good and bad. After many generations, the burden falls to Yetu, who struggles with the task and severe anxiety, and she finally desires to break free. So this was a very intriguing premise, and it was worth the read, but it didn't resonate the way I was hoping it would. I think the majority of the story surrounding Yetu is where I was left wanting. Her story was good, but I wanted so much more history and lore of these people. The book is very lyrical, and the brevity of the novella works with that. But I was hoping for something more sprawling, and I actually wish it was much longer. It was still good. It's a great concept, very intriguing. It just wasn't what I wanted in the end, but I also think that might be a me problem. Book 96 is The Heiress by Rachel Hawkins. The story is about the wealthiest family in North Carolina, the McTavishes, whose family estate sits high in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The most notorious of all is Ruby McTavish, a widow 4 times over, who disappeared but was found when she was a toddler, and the heir to the McTavish throne. Half the book is her story told through her letters written a decade prior, just before her death, and her adopted son Cam in present day, with his wife Jules being pulled back into the family's drama after his uncle's death. So I thought the book was entertaining enough and easy to consume, but definitely a popcorn read. Unfortunately, it felt too similar to the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, even down to that iconic silk green dress each title character is known for, and on the cover of both books. This one definitely had more of an element of mystery to it, whereas Evelyn Hugo was talking about all of her former husbands, but most of them were divorces for whatever reason, whereas all of Ruby's husbands are dead, and so she goes into their deaths, but she also goes into the mystery surrounding her disappearance as a child and how that affected her throughout her life, always wondering if the right baby was returned. And there was a pretty big twist, not at the end, but close to it, which I had kind of figured out, but it was okay. However, the entire book, though entertaining, it was easily forgettable. Book 97 is The Duke and I, the first of the Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn. In Regency-era London, Daphne Bridgerton, the fourth oldest of the 8 Bridgerton children, is ready to find a husband and settle down to begin a family of her own. She ends up landing a duke when the two are caught in a scandalous encounter at a ball. Unfortunately for Daphne, Simon never planned to marry or produce an heir to his land and title because of his own father's abusive treatment when Simon wasn't the perfect son he expected. I don't get it. Gonna be honest, I watched the first season of the show on Netflix and thought it was just okay, but not enough to tune back in for the next 2 seasons. But I thought maybe the books have more that I didn't get from the show. Nope. No, not at all. The book was even more boring. Surprisingly. At least on the show, it had more of Daphne's siblings and other things going on in this aristocratic society. But in the book, it's just all her and Simon with a few scenes of her 3 older brothers, all of whom are interchangeable to me, none of them were distinct, and they're just arguing over protecting her honor. That's it. On the page, Daphne and Simon are just too boring for me to understand how this launched into an 8-book series and a hit Netflix show. If somebody has more context, please explain. Send help. Book 98 is Thank You for Listening by Julia Whalen. When Swanee Chester had to leave a promising acting career after a terrible accident, she found the world of audiobook narration. Many years into her new career, she takes on a role for the final book of a deceased romance author adored by many. She forms a very close relationship with her male co-star, albeit through text and email, as he lives on the opposite coast, and uses a stage name so no one knows his true identity. As Swanee gets to know him better, she allows herself to hope that she can reclaim some of her old life before her accident. This was a nice, easy book from the queen of audiobook narration herself, Julia Whalen, who also narrated this audiobook, of course. It went exactly where I expected it to go because, after all, it is a romance. There is some of Swanee finding herself again, but overall, it is a romance. And it ended up being a very sweet, cozy story. Other than being a little long for what it was, I enjoyed it. Book 99 is A Christmas Carol. Do I really need to tell you the plot of A Christmas Carol? Okay, I guess I will. So, angry, bitter, Christmas-hating Ebenezer Scrooge is visited by 3 ghosts, past, present, and future, to learn how to become a better person before it's too late. I mean, we all know this, right? Oh, and it's by Charles Dickens. You know. I don't feel like I need to say too much. But anyway, I definitely read this probably in 7th grade, or at least parts of it. I honestly can't remember if I read the whole thing. I've been involved in a stage production. I've seen multiple adaptations. I'm sure we all have. And my favorite is Scrooged with Bill Murray. We watch it every Christmas Eve. I'm not even going to talk about the story that much because there's not a whole lot to say. I just really needed kind of a quick listen while I was working on Christmas presents, and yeah, it was timely, being the holiday season and all. The biggest thing for me was I was looking for an audiobook version, of which there are many, 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 many. And all of them came in at around 3 hours. And so I'm like, why do they keep giving me these abridged versions of the story? Because I know some of Dickens' other works are extremely long. And so I assumed this one was much longer than it was. No, it's not. It is a novella. And all the audiobooks came in at around maybe 3 hours and 15 minutes. So it was a nice quick read. Listen, whatever. Exactly what I needed. Oh, and I picked the Hugh Grant version because Hugh Grant's become synonymous with Christmas for me because of Love Actually. So it all went together hand in hand. And it is time. We are there. It is book 100. And of course, I had to be a dork and pick something with 100 in the title. Sorry. So the book is The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out the Window and Disappeared by Jonas Jonasson. It's Swedish. It was translated, obviously. I don't speak Swedish. So Alan Carlson decides he no longer wants to waste away in a nursing home. And as everyone is preparing for his 100th birthday celebration, he slips out the window and soon becomes entangled with other oddball characters, landing themselves in a world of trouble. But that's nothing new to him because Alan, during his very long life, often landed himself in trouble during some of the most important historical events of the 20th century. I wanted to like this book so much. It started off so cute and charming. It felt like if Wes Anderson directed a Swedish version of Forrest Gump. That's like the best way I can describe it. Unfortunately, it went on and on and on and on. So the main misadventure that he and the people he meets along the way all get into in present day was very intriguing. I liked it. I wanted to know where it was going. But unfortunately, it was constantly being interrupted by chapters detailing Alan's past and these big historical events that he found himself in all over the world, just barely escaping certain death at the last moment. I mean, seriously, he eventually ends up taking a 15-year break on the beach in Bali, and I could not have been more grateful to not have to listen to what other political intrigue or lack thereof he was involved in. At first, it was fun and like, that's cute, but then it just kept going, and it was a story element that wore out very quickly. So the present day story was fun, but hard to enjoy with a mountain of backstory bogging it down. No, I'm not really that tall. I was on a step stool because it's big. It is too big. I don't know what I could have done differently other than fewer books. Ooh. Okay, so that was that. That was a lot. My wrists are killing me from trying to hold that up and from doing the border yesterday, which I feel like needs steamed. It's not laying right. I wish I could have done, it's a 5-stitch ribbed border. I wish I could have done 10. I had the yarn for it, but I didn't have the time for it. So that's what it is. Anyway, I have no idea what I'm gonna do with this thing. It may just end up on the back of the chair forever. I don't know. My youngest says I should hang it on the wall. I don't know if there's a blank space big enough for that, where the cat wouldn't mess with it as well because he's a jerk. But anyway, it's done. I won't be doing that ever again. I mean, I'll still continue crocheting and I will still continue with the books, but I will not be making anything of that magnitude ever again. It was a lot. And if you were curious, I'm not gonna hold up the whole thing, but here's just the back with the solid granny squares. Favorite book of the year? It's actually 2. It would be Animal Farm and Project Hail Mary. And don't come at me with Animal Farm because I didn't read it in junior high or high school like a lot of people. And I'm glad I didn't, because I think if I read that book about talking animals when I was a child, when my brain wasn't fully developed, I would have hated it. But like as an adult, I can appreciate what it is and what it's an allegory for. So that I enjoyed very much. And then I really liked Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, who also wrote The Martian. And then Project Hail Mary is going to be a movie, I think, later this year, maybe next year, with Ryan Gosling as the main character. So I also read Andy Weir's other book. I'm not sure if he has any more novels or not, but that was Artemis, and I did not like it. I talked about it in the last video. It was book 71, I believe, and it just did not care for that one. But Project Hail Mary, very good. I did get through a lot of classics that maybe some people did when they were in school, but not everybody had the same education. So I'm glad I finally got to read them on my own without a book report due as an adult who could appreciate them more, or really honestly wonder why they're still part of a school curriculum, because some of them were just bad. Not going to go into too many Wuthering Heights, but I mean, it was just, I couldn't believe that they expect children to read some of this stuff. I was quite shocked when I got through it, barely, and they expected younger people to read, enjoy, or at least be able to talk about these things critically. I don't get it. But anyway, I think the worst book, objectively, which is a weird thing to say, and I know it has its fans, but The Ghost of Marley House is truly terrible. It felt like it was written by AI, but it came out in 2014, so 10-year-old AI, well, I guess 11 years old at this point. And last time I checked, which would have been almost a year ago when I listened to the audiobook of this first one, at that time it had 34 books in the series over a 10-year period. So I'm not saying the author isn't real, but is she? Really? 34 books in 10 years? And when I say it seemed like it was written by AI, there was an entire chapter where like the main female character's best friend goes on a date with this shady guy across the street who you don't know what his motives are. And so you're like, oh, finally we're gonna find some stuff out. Literally the entire chapter is them trying to decide what to order for dinner. I'm not kidding. It's like 6-7 pages of them just going through the menu and trying to decide what to order for dinner. Anyway, so overall, I think it was a very interesting experiment to get through all of these and make a blanket, but definitely will be doing it again. Oh, and by the way, I did DNF 3 books, One Dark Window, The Bone Witch, and Slaughterhouse 5. The first 2 were for the same reason. They were high fantasy that set up these worlds, and after probably 15-20% of the way through them, I just was not invested in this world or the magic or anything else that was part of it, and I was sometimes just lost at names and places and things like that. So I'm like, nah, we're good. And then for Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut, I could tell within the first 2 chapters I was not in the headspace for it at the time. I think I was getting ready for my Brazil trip when I started it, and I was like, oh, no, my head is not where it needs to be for something like this. So I sent it back to the library, and maybe I'll give it another shot one of these days. I don't know. So in the end, I kind of feel like, I mean, I like how I did the squares for the most part. It clearly evolved over time. They were much simpler in the beginning, and I didn't use the crochet thread for the author's name and title. I kind of wish I had just never done that, because it did add so much work, And in the end, I'm not sure if it even really helped. Maybe it was more distracting on a lot of squares. But yeah, if I could go back, I would just say don't worry about the title and the author. Like, no, just deal with what you have on the cover. So that's it for the 2024 book blanket. I will list all the books below in case you didn't catch them during the slideshow and don't want to go back. I don't have any recommendations because I don't do that. Everybody's so different. And I'm not taking recommendations either because I don't care. I am still continuing my book journey. I'm technically on my 5th book, but I DNF'd Moby Dick a few weeks ago because I can tell there's a good story there, but I don't give a shit about chapters that are nothing about the different classes of whales or whale ships or methods of whaling. I don't care. I do not. So if I can ever find an abridged version that's simply the story, maybe I'll give it another shot. But I got a quarter of the way through it and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. So returned that one and I'm on book 4 now. But I won't be reviewing or discussing or making anything to resemble anything I'm reading this year. So this is where I'm leaving that. I will have a 2025 year-long project though. It'll be much simpler. It's not going to be nearly as involved, I say now, but I will reveal that in a couple of weeks. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube things, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!